Great. So, hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Forte Markets Legal Innovation Journey Online. I'm looking forward to keeping our legal tech journey in action through this 3-day series of webinars. Today, we have Legal Skills of the Future, which will be moderated by April. So, April, if I can hand over to you now.
Yep. Hi. Thanks, everyone. My name is April Brousseau, and I work at Clifford Chance in the Innovation Group. I'm here to sort of introduce our panelists. Today, we're going to be talking about legal skills of the future. I think it's well acknowledged that the practice of law has been undergoing an evolution, albeit a slow one, and that has resulted in a clear need for different and new skills, which has resulted in different professions arising in the law. We are today talking about what sort of skills do we really need to, in order to be successful in the future of law. This is for people currently in-house practice, studying, or in firms. Our panelists come from a broad range of backgrounds and have a broad range of skill sets and are going to be able to talk to us about some really interesting thoughts around new legal skills. And I'm going to turn it over to introduce everyone. And one of the things that I've asked each of the panelists to say while introducing themselves is, what is one skill that you wish that you had when you started the practice of law? For myself, I would argue there are many skills that I wish I had when I started the practice of law that I did not have. But probably the primary one would be communication. So where law school trained me to be really good at arguing and doing it in writing in the form of a paper, or in the form of oral arguments, I have now realized the importance of needing to communicate more challenging concepts in different ways. And I still struggle every day to learn a little bit more on how to do that, and wish that I could get better at it a little bit faster. But I'm going to turn it over to Alison Hosking to introduce herself, please.
Thanks, April. Thank you. I'm Alison Hosking. I'm Director of Knowledge and Legal Transformation at Alison Company. We are the largest law firm in the Middle East, spanning 9 countries, lots of offices all over the place. I've been with Alison for the past couple of years. I was previously a lawyer, also taught the postgraduate law courses in the UK at Nottingham Law School for a few years, and have had the benefit of working in a variety of jurisdictions across the world. In relation to the question that April's given us to think about, again, I haven't got just one straight answer, I'm afraid. The one thing which I wished that I'd known or had a bit more of an experience of, or any experience of when I was at law school, was about clients and actually making sure that whatever I did, that clients are at the heart of that. The traditional law firm, the traditional law school route of learning lots of black letter law equipped me only probably partly for the job, because that was great. I knew lots of law, but actually I didn't understand how my clients operated, what they needed from me. Me regurgitating the law wasn't helpful, particularly to them. And to echo April's comment, I think the skill of listening is really key. So not just speaking and doing the whole listening to respond, it's just listening to actually understand what it is that's being said to you. So that's me, thank you.
Great, thanks, Alison. Erica Pagano, I'll turn it over to you, please.
Thanks, April. My name's Erica Pagano, and I'm the head of legal innovation and design at Simmons Wavelength, which is a part of Simmons & Simmons. I'm also guest faculty at IE University in Madrid, where I teach on legal innovation as well and legal design. I think it's an awesome question about what law school didn't teach us, and this is part of what I get to do now since I'm still teaching in law school. And I feel a little bit like this is Sesame Street, the children's show, because you might notice that there's a theme here. We heard about communication, which starts with the letter C. We heard about clients, which also starts with the letter C. And I've got another C word for you, which is collaboration. I think this is something that we do quite naturally from an early age as children. When we're learning to play with each other, if you go to Montessori school or things like that. Growing up, I went to circus camp where we had to collaborate a lot, doing improv growing up. That's the same thing too. I think that listening would be a close second. Alison touched a bit on this. And again, some of us are formally trained in these things outside of of legal education, but it's not something that we actually do while we're in school, generally speaking. We can even learn these skills if we are working retail or working at a restaurant. But I think that we need to really understand what our clients want, how we can take this collaboration, these listening, these client skills, and how to action them into tangible skills. And I think that's something that the legal profession is starting to do. And I'll talk a little bit later on how I think some of our most recent challenges have forced us to do that, as well as talk about some of the pioneering people and programs who are really making a big impact. Thanks.
Thanks, Erica. Laura, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, April. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Bygrave. I'm the Innovation and Ventures Lead here at Deloitte Legal, and I founded the Deloitte Legal Ventures Programme, where we partner with early stage startups to improve the adoption and uptake of legal technology. In terms of April's question, so building on your point around communication, one thing I wished I'd learned was the psychology around negotiating, particularly where we're looking at the adoption of technology. Thinking about what's in it for the person that you're trying to get to use it is really fundamental to actually getting them to adopt it, thinking about the cultural aspect of change. And even though I've read books on it now, I just wish at the outset of my career someone sat me down and said, this is how you bring people along, because it would have got a lot further a lot quicker. So I think there's a lot of hype in the market around thinking about different mindsets and cultural change, but there's not enough emphasis on it in early career. And hopefully through the discussion today, we can debate the technicalities of the future of law versus the cultural parts as well.
Thanks, Laura. Hussein, can I turn to you?
Hi, I'm Hussein Hadi, and I'm Head of Middle East Publishing at LexisNexis. I'm also a lecturer with the Government of Dubai Legal Affairs Department and the Association of Corporate Counsel, teaching technology adoption and also measuring and demonstrating value within teams. I couldn't agree more with what's been said earlier about putting the client at the heart of things, so I might add something else. I would say it's basic proficiency in using tech tools. I'm going to refer to an article from 2013. The in-house lawyer at Kia Motors in the US, he generated a lot of controversy because he basically said that he wanted law firms trying to win business from him to prove that they had a basic level of tech competency. He created this 1-hour exam that he would ask law firms to pass. And he invited 9 law firms, and it should normally take an hour to do the tasks he'd outlined using PDF, Word, Excel, and all law firms failed the tech competency test that he had set for them. All the senior associates put forward were not able to do that basic thing. So I think as lawyers, we can all do the obvious, track changes, merging, basic stuff in Excel, but perhaps we should have been taught more, how can we do things quicker, faster with the tools we have? And that could have been something that would have been useful when, certainly when I was doing my law degree, instead of sifting through gray elements of land law, this thick book, someone telling me how could I use research tools more effectively.
Thanks, Hussein. Ramez, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm the only layperson in the group. My name is Ramez Dandan. I'm the CTO for Microsoft here in the region. I've been in tech for over 30 years in MIA, based in Dubai, and did stunts in Saudi and Kuwait. I don't. I mean, the question of what skills I don't believe it's never late. I don't believe it's late for acquiring skills, to be honest. I cannot name a single skill that I didn't have a chance later in life at some point through self-motivation and organizational motivation to acquire or to hone or to improve. So I'm a subscriber of a learner mindset. It is the mindset that allows you to not stand still in terms of knowledge, okay? We believe that in the company I work for, we encourage it from the top down. Skills are, some of them are inherent and you can improve and hone. Some of them are acquired and you can learn them, and it's never too late to learn them, even the skill of using the tools.
Thanks, Ramez. I'd like to turn over to Robert Mars.
Thanks, April, and hello all. Well, I like Ramez, am a lay person. My mother wishes I'd gone to law school, but I studied politics instead. So I work for the Law Society of Scotland, the professional body for solicitors here, and we set the route to qualification as a solicitor. And what I wish I'd learned, very similar to what everyone said so far, for me, I wish I'd learned earlier more about building on the point about psychology and negotiation, just the sort of psychology more generally of what makes people tick, why they make the decisions they do, why they don't make decisions which seemingly, to me, would be in their interest to make, and all the sort of complex movers and drivers that we all have. It's very easy to assume that the person you're dealing with will make the same choice as you. Well, maybe they don't, and it took me a while to get that. So for me, Bill, I mean, I think everything that everybody said is absolutely true. I think the learner mindset is critical. The importance of communication and client, but for me, that would be the one that is slightly different from all the others, but I suppose in the broad ballpark.
Thanks. And our final panelist, Robert Millard.
Thanks, April. Well, also not legally qualified. I wouldn't call myself a layperson, though. I think I'm very well versed in the business of law. I'm the director of Cambridge Strategy Group here in Cambridge. Like Erica, I also lecture at the IE Law School in Madrid, and I lecture on law firm strategy and digital transformation. What skills I'd wish I'd had from the start rather. When I finished high school, my headmaster gave me a somewhat backhanded compliment in the testimonial he gave me. He told me, well, he wrote, Millard is public-spirited to a fault. So I guess I've always been quite inclusive and collaborative in the way that I tackle things, but I wish that from the start I'd had the skills to be able to tackle that in a very a more constructive, structured way. I had the tools more, I guess, than the skills. And to me, that means two things. The first is that I wish I'd been taught from the outset to break big projects down into tasks and work out how best to allocate and organize people and tools across those, in other words, project management. Last month, I presented a session on legal project management at the annual conference of the Junior Lawyers Division of the Law Society of England and Wales. And I ran a poll at the beginning of the session asking participants where they thought legal project management fell on a scale of 5 to 1, 5 being very complex, very difficult, 1 being very simple. And almost all the votes, in fact, I would say all the votes, went to the very complex, very difficult side. Extrapolating that, I think that's tragic because it's suggesting that we have a whole new generation of lawyers out there who believe that managing their projects, their work, is complex and difficult. I learned project management on an immensely complex project. It was a multi-billion-dollar cross-border civil engineering project. So I suppose my perspective is shaped by that. But to my mind, there's absolutely no reason why legal project management should be viewed as complex. Anything more than simple and intuitive. Of course, the substance of the legal work is getting more complex, but the process of making sure that work is delivered to scope within budget on time and to the required level of quality, how could that be anything but simple? So that's the one thing. The other thing that I wish I'd learned right at the outset is how to set strategy properly. This thing called strategy needs to be a lot more inclusive and iterative than it is. At its best, it's an ongoing process of making sense of what's going on in the market and with clients and inside the firm, and then working out what the firm's next steps need to be within agreed limits and an overarching direction, of course. But it's not a great big deliberate linear thing that one does every couple of years, making grand assumptions about the future and then building plans around that. When I did my MBA back in the 1990s, it was this quite secretive thing. It was almost esoteric and exclusive thing that generals do and CEOs of massive corporations, you know, masses of analysis and then thick slide decks, and then secret meetings with leaders all making big assumptions and big decisions, and then handing the decisions out to the followers and saying, okay, you go and implement. That approach has never sat well with me. From very early on, I believe strategy is far more common sense. It's understanding with great clarity what your clients need, what value you can deliver in meeting those clients, and how you're going to deliver that and make money and be profitable over time. And of course, this sometimes means that you need to make groundbreaking decisions and that some things need to be kept confidential, of course. But it was an epiphany last year, just to finish, an epiphany for me last year at a conference in Boston to hear the head of the MBA program at the Harvard Business School and his counterpart at Said at Oxford both say they were tearing up their syllabus for strategy and they were going to teach approaches that were far more responsive to change in the future. And most law firms, I think, are still mired in the old-fashioned linear way of doing things. So I wish that these two gentlemen had said what they said last August, 30 years ago, and that I'd been there to hear them, and so had my clients.
That's really, really interesting. Thanks, Rob. I want to put out to the audience as well. So we are going to be talking in more detail about the specific types of skills that we think lawyers and legal professionals of the future need. But we'd also like to poll you. Now, we weren't able to get an actual poll to work on this meeting, unfortunately, but we do think it would be really interesting to get your feedback, and you can provide that to us via the chat about the kinds of skills that you don't have that you wish you had, or that you have now that you didn't have that you wish you had. And we'd really like to see the kinds of things that you guys are thinking about, and we'll be responding to those as well. So to frame the discussion a little bit, I want to pick up on some of the points that have been made, and I think Ram has made the point quite well, is that we've all been talking about practical skills, but also, as Rob mentioned, there are sort of broader mindset changes that we might need to consider. And so, are we talking about just the practical skills that we need to acquire, or is there a more cultural mindset change? I'm going to turn it over to Hussein, who's done a fair bit of research on some of the things, some of the different Law Society reports and other reports that have talked about what needs to change for the profession to be successful.
Thank you. I'm going to focus a little bit on technology skills and this idea that we have to put the client at the heart of everything we do and use technology and new approaches to deliver services better and provide solutions. The first thing to say is that most law societies around the world have recognized this. So if you look at the American Bar Association, they've extended the lawyer's duty of competence to keep abreast of changes in law to also knowing the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. A lot of states have said that you need competence beyond knowledge of substantive law to a duty of technological competence. The Law Society of England and Wales says legal businesses which use technology to deliver legal services, focusing on smarter, more flexible resourcing, carrying out work in a more project management style, and thinking in terms of process management and improvement, will look very different to the pyramid law firm of the past. So this is a change that we're seeing. If I refer to some of the reports that have come out, the Law Society of England and Wales has done a lot of really good work trying to highlight the skills gap. So they're talking about what legal tech are law firms using now. People are using e-discovery. They're starting to look at contract automation, but fundamentally what's holding a lot of law firms back is the cultural mindset that Rob talks about. A lot of people are resistant to the idea of incorporating best practice from management consultants, for example. Rob was one of the key speakers at a really great IBA event, Building the Law Firm of the Future. And one of the sessions was on learning from the Big Four, which have perhaps been more proactive in bringing these techniques, bringing operational excellence, bringing in outside people, bringing in legal experts, innovation experts to make that better. So to talk about some of the studies that have come out. So Singapore did a survey looking at how people are comfortable with legal technology, what people hope to get out of technology. And they then actually went a step further. They've created a program called Techcelerate. They've actually identified what does a baseline level of legal tech adoption look like, what does an advanced level look like, and they've even identified vendors that they've vetted and said that might be useful for you. They've then gone a step further where you can apply for funding to actually use and acquire that technology. Another interesting report came from the Law Society of Scotland. I think did a fantastic job. They've highlighted some of the key challenges today in the skills gap. How many lawyers are comfortable using remote working tools? How many lawyers have used things like online filing, etc. And then they've created a strategy to bridge that gap, which I think is very good. And I'll praise the Law Society of Scotland for being the first to have a legal tech certification that you can put on your business card on your LinkedIn page. So various associations have worked to identify where the skills gap is, but fundamentally we're talking about how can I provide the services I do quicker, more efficiently, and where technology can come into play. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an expert necessarily in using legal technology. I think fundamentally it's about understanding pain points and where technology can play a role. So I want to finish with two quotes. The first one is from Ben Fote, who is the Group Legal Director at the UK Post Office. So he speaks on behalf of in-house lawyers. You must get your own house in order first. Don't just get a piece of legal technology. You need to understand your business first and foremost. What are the workflows that come through the legal department? What is your information systems telling you about the risks in your business? When you understand the processes, then you can start to interrogate where technology can make a difference. I'll also quote Reed Smith. Like a lot of the panelists here, Simmons, Clifford Chance, a lot of the international law firms have set up incubation units to encourage, Clifford Chance has a graduate recruitment scheme in legal tech, for example. I like the Reed Smith definition here. Gravity Stack was formed with a vision to combine data insights with the most experienced legal process and operational experts. Our blend of data and human intelligence is redefining value in the legal industry. So it's basically marrying together operational experts, human intelligence with data to come up with something better. And like I said with the first quote, it's about identifying pain points. So for me, it's about a cultural mindset, leveraging legal tech to help us be more efficient.
That's really great. Thanks, Hussein. On your data point, one of our attendees has also called out that one of the skills that they think is important is learning not just the law, but data. So I think that's really relevant. I'm going to turn to Laura now, because Laura, in your introduction, you referred to sort of the psychology piece, which I think is quite relevant here, and get your thoughts on a little bit more detail around that, please.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, April. So from a Deloitte perspective, one thing that we're really focused on is growth mindset. So within our Deloitte Ventures team, which focuses on startups, we have a mindset studio, which shows the importance that we actually put on the cultural side of change. And one thing that we've been thinking about working with lawyers and working across multidisciplinary practice, because it's not just lawyers within Deloitte Legal, is how we bring people along. So typically, if you join a law firm now, you've got some appetite to be using tech for either efficiency purposes or to develop new delivery models. And sort of there is a big shift in the market to self-service delivery, either from clients and through use of automation and products that are sort of freely out there that we use in our day-to-day lives. So one thing that we were thinking about from a cultural perspective is, how do we incentivize people to think differently and want to do this proactively, rather than setting targets against using technology, being curious about technology? So one thing that we did quite recently, and I found really interesting, was we set up a Scout program. So taking the problems and the pain points that have been sourced from across the business, not just legal, but legal is one of the many service lines that sits across Deloitte alongside tax and consulting and others, and putting out those problems to a network of scouts so that they can go and source the next tech startups that could solve them, and actually putting the power into the crowd. I think that's really important for the future, because you need the power of the crowd to make that change. So reflecting on the conversation around, are we talking about the practical skills of the future or the mindset and cultural changes? I don't think you can do one without the other. The technical things are easier to train because you can do that in a classroom, but actually thinking from a grassroots perspective, how you're going to drive that cultural shift, I think is something that we haven't done enough of yet as an industry, but everyone's very aware that we need to do more of it. So I'm really interested to hear from the other panelists as we go through the discussions, how they're approaching that cultural change perspective, because I'm sure there's insights that will benefit all of us.
That's great. Thanks, Laura. And I want to turn to Ramez. You talked about having, learned skills throughout your career and having this mindset of always being a learner. And we'd also talked previously about sort of having an open mind and that being a really critical, not necessarily a skill, but almost a habit. And so do you want to talk a little bit more about that, particularly from your perspective as a non-lawyer who has to work with lawyers?
Sure, but let me just dispel a notion here. I think McKinsey a couple of years ago did a survey of organizations of all sizes and all sectors to understand their digital transformation journey, right? The journey in adopting technology and digital and becoming more efficient and more agile and more relevant for their customers. And that was 2018. They found like 30% have done 30% of organizations, a little bit less than 30%, have done anything about digital transformation. 16% of them call it a success, okay? And in the technology sector, so these are companies that live and breathe technology, the rate is 26%, okay? So 26% of tech-savvy, tech-competent tech companies fail or succeed, while the other 74% fail, right, to transform. So that tells you how the mindset is a bigger factor in my mind. The mindset, the clarity from the top, the direction, the enablement, the encouragement, right? It's organizational changes take the whole organization. Is more important. Knowing the tech is not in itself a guarantee of success. At Microsoft, we subscribe to the growth mindset that was mentioned, and it's encouraged in a sense that it's safe to fail, but it's not safe to not try, right? We encourage everybody to challenge themselves and others, work well with cross-function, because that's very important, and I think that's important regardless what size the organization is or its geographical spread. Learning how to collaborate with others, not just in your immediate team but across teams. That's where innovation kind of comes up, and to do that, yes, basic skills in using the tools is important, but the constant reminder that the power of the whole is a lot more than the power of the individual is key. Technology is there to enable this. Technology makes it possible, okay, but you need to have a mindset that allows you to use it in the right way.
That's great.
April, can I just jump in?
Yeah, please.
Can I just jump in and just say a couple of things? So totally agree with you, Ramez and Laura. I read the Wolters Kluwer report yesterday, the 2020 version, the Future Ready Lawyer report, and there's some really quite interesting stats in there, and would encourage everybody to have a quick flick through it. And one thing which really resonated with me was that there's an alarming gap between an awareness and a readiness to change, and I think that is something which I'm certainly familiar with. It's all about a fear of change, leadership resistance, lack of strategy. And it kind of goes back to what Richard Susskind has said time and time again about how do you tell a room full of millionaires that what they're doing is wrong, because they're set in their ways, they seem to be doing well. So why should they shift from what they're doing? Is that going to, how are they going to move the dial? Because what they've been doing for years and years seems to be working well for them. I think just going back to the client point, whatever we do as a firm, and what I've always tried to do, not always got it right over the years, is to just make sure that how and what am I doing? Is this going to benefit the client? How is this going to help the client by buying this piece of legal tech? How is that ultimately going to help the client? And I think there is that disconnect between in-house and law firms, in so far as going back to Eric, I think, who put something in the chat, one of the attendees. I think in-house have got a bit better handle on the importance of legal tech compared to quite a lot of law firms, and it will be the in-house lawyers who are pushing harder on law firms that will eventually make the change, rather than it being necessarily the other way around. Obviously, that's not a sweeping generalization, but in my kind of experience and recent experience, that's certainly the case.
Thanks, Alison. I think this might be a good, transition, particularly since you referenced that report, to maybe talk a little bit more. We've now talked about the mindset, but sort of what are some of the more practical skills that we all started to talk about? And I might turn it back to Hussein, just to see if there was any in the reports that you referred to. Did they call out any specific types of skills that are more in need than others?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the Association of Corporate Counsel, they have a Chief Legal Officer survey every year where the ACC has 35,000 members worldwide. They look at the Chief Legal Officers, and we're seeing that the Chief Legal Officer globally is starting to get a seat at the strategic table. So thankfully, we're seeing that in-house lawyers are moving away from being goalkeepers to actually driving strategy. There was a really interesting Harvard Business Law Review study which compared the performance of CEOs when they were formerly in-house lawyers versus MBA graduates. So they actually took the top 1,500 companies in the US and they actually crunched the numbers. 9% of the CEOs were former in-house lawyers. And then they compared the performance in the same industry where it was an MBA graduate. And thankfully, the in-house lawyers performed pretty well. I mean, in areas where there's a lot of litigation, having an in-house lawyer as a CEO means you can mitigate risk and you can grow in a sustained way. So that was positive in the sense that in-house lawyers have visibility of the whole business. They're generally very good at project management. They work with procurement, they work with facilities. If you flip that on the other side, and I think the point was made, in-house lawyers perhaps are a bit more open to new concepts when it comes to legal tech. A lot of law firms are a bit resistant to this idea that you have to, as Rob said earlier, you have to use project management skills here. You have to look at all your processes, all your pain points, and almost be your own management consultant. With all due respect to the McKinseys of the world, you don't necessarily have to bring McKinsey in to just look at how you actually work and say, is this the most efficient way of doing it? Am I simply going in my folder, taking out my contract, cutting and pasting? Is there a better way of doing this? Is there a better way of collaborating, whether it's using Slack or using Yammer? So it's basically acting as your own internal consultant. How do I map out my processes? How do I identify my pain points? And then only then can I use technology to interrogate what I do. So I think you can actually teach lawyers these skills. And I think some law firms are starting to do it really well. I know certainly Clifford Chance, Simmons are very good at this sort of thing. There's an annual Innovative Lawyers Index that the Financial Times does, and they awarded recently to Freshfields. One of the things Freshfields does really well, it takes their associates, it seconds them to the client, and they have a very specific remit. If they identify a problem for the client, those associates can come back to the firm. They're partnered with technologists, with project management experts to come up with a solution. It might be as simple as a compliance calendar. It might be a nice app. It might be getting news on WhatsApp. So it's basically thinking, how can I solve my client's problems? How can I do things more efficiently? Once you start thinking, how can I be more efficient? It becomes naturally. It's not about, oh, how can I be better at Word? How can I be better at Excel? There's a lot of things on the chat about how that in-house lawyers tested key is quite terrifying, but it's just about being a bit more open to using things. So, you know, use iScanner if you don't have a scanner at home. Use voice recognition software. Look for quick wins. How can I make life better for my clients? So it's changing that mindset, and it's trying to identify how can I be my own internal consultant to identify those pain points.
Yeah, that's great. Alison, I might pick up on a point that you made earlier, and when we spoke earlier around sort of commercial savvy, business acumen, and this something that they don't teach you in law school is this need to be commercial. And certainly I can speak from my perspective around as sort of I'm the sort of center of the funnel where ideas come in and they are filtered, and I'm having to regularly test people's ideas against concepts of commerciality. And so I would like to hear a little bit about your experience in that area.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're moving at quite a rapid pace. And I think the new generation of lawyers that are coming through the law schools, it's not good enough for them just to learn what I did, which is the traditional legal skills. They've got to now learn the 21st century skills, which include, you know, business skills, having the softer skills such as cultural awareness, collaboration, but also commercial awareness. And interestingly, this is something when I applied for the job that I took at Nottingham Law School when I lectured there for a few years, it was a question that they gave me to present on. And I was really like, whoa, you know, I'm coming in to teach debt and constitutional law. What is this? You're asking me about how to teach commercial awareness. Interestingly enough, we did a small module on it, but nothing of any significance at all. And we kind of stuck to the traditional black letter law approach. But it is something which, and again, Rob, Erica, you probably can speak better to this than me as being in the education sector. It is something which I think is absolutely key, because when you do enter the workplace, it's great that I can read a case and I can read a statute book, but actually having the commercial awareness wrapper around it is vital in my mind.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And it's, I think it's particularly in this economy, I think that a lot of us will have experienced a lot more pressure, you know, internally about, a lot of people are asking, why are you doing this? Like where, like what is the purpose of this? Is it to make whose life easier? What is the job to be done? You know, is this an area that we should even be playing in, which is a conversation I regularly have. You know, as a law firm, we are not a tech startup. We are not a tech shop. Is this a feasible idea? And having those hard conversations, I think wouldn't be so hard if more people sort of had that commercial sense. I'd like to talk a little bit also about the project management piece. And, you know, one of the arguments that I regularly have from lawyers is that I'm already a really good project manager. I mean, I couldn't do my job if I wasn't a good project manager. So Rob, you talked a little bit about this in your session. Do you want to expand on that a little bit about your experience and what you think?
Yeah, I mean, just by way of illustration, there was a comment made on Bruce Sirius has got this series of summer school legal tech webinars going, and one of the comments yesterday was about how an assessment was done on how much of a lawyer's work could be done by technology that already exists, and the percentage was relatively low, and everybody, they said, breathed a sigh of relief. But the next question then is, why is it so low? How much of legal work is unstructured now because that's just the way it's always been, and it can be far better codified, and it can be reinvented in a more structured way that would make it possible for it to be better planned at a certain level and taken over by technology at another level. And later on, maybe I can talk about what that work might be replaced by, more complex work to do with the fourth industrial revolution. But let's focus for the moment on the work that's on a lawyer's desk right now. The first step clearly is to codify, to break it down into its tasks and work out the best way to deliver each task. But there's another layer of work that firms often don't do, especially if they are charging by the hour, and as they say, you can do very well being inefficient if you're charging by the hour. And that is to redefine the client's needs and then work back from that and find radically different ways of delivering that work. And I know your firm and several of the firms on this call are doing a lot of work in this area. So to my mind, that's what project management really is about. In the legal sector, it's got beyond just working out how to do the work that we're doing today more efficiently. It's getting into the realms of how do we change this radically in order to be able to deliver it at a whole new level. Because to that question that was asked earlier in Richard Susskind's one about how do you tell a group of millionaires that their business model is wrong? Well, clients have been telling those millionaires that for a while. And what I'm hearing now with the COVID pandemic is that that message is becoming more strident. And what was tolerated 4 months ago isn't being tolerated today and is not going to be tolerated in 4 months' time. So I do think we are going to see a sea change in the way that lawyers look at their work and recognize what is standardized or can be standardized rather than be saying, oh no, every matter is bespoke.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat, and Alison's also responded about sort of getting back to basics as a skill. And I know you previously mentioned that that was something you also thought was important.
Yeah, and Hussein's kind of nailed it. I mean, it really is down to, so you want to collaborate better? Well, look at the tools you've got. I mean, Teams, I want to steal Ramez's thunder. I'm sure he can talk about it far more effectively than I can. Or iManage or HiQ or whatever it is that your firm's using. I mean, if lawyers can't even pass a basic tech literacy test based on the Microsoft suite of products, by which I mean Word and Excel, and maybe Adobe and how to make PDFs, how are they going to start using Teams more efficiently, and Planner and the other tools that are collaboration driving? Because I think it's crucial to get back to those basics now and get good at those, because there's just onto this fourth industrial revolution, the complexity of client needs that are being spawned by clients themselves being disrupted by technology is hardly on the radar for most law firms. It is for some, But what a client needs going to be in a world where you've got 5G grade broadband anywhere on planet Earth? Because that's probably 3 to 5 years ago if Elon Musk has his way. What about where you have data on a scale that's just unmanageable in the way that we understand data management today? I mean, stacks of DVDs to the sun and back. A yottabyte of DVDs a yottabyte reduced to DVDs is from here to the sun and back again and a half of the way to the sun again. And there's about somewhere between 10 and 20% of a yottabyte of data in the world at the moment. So these kinds of questions, one could call them scenarios, but I don't think they're scenarios. These are questions that have a reasonable chance of becoming forecasts. And the suite of legal needs and the suite of tools that lawyers will need in order to advise clients in that kind of a world are so radically different to today that if they don't get the mindset around using technology now, I think it's going to be difficult for some firms to catch up later.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, so what I'm hearing sort of people from the panel say is that there are a range of skills that I think need to be added to potentially the curriculums of firms and schools. And so, you know, I've heard digital literacy, I've heard changed attitude and mindset, I've heard problem solving, communication, collaboration. I think this might be an interesting opportunity to, you know, put it out to the panel to see if there are any other skills that, you know, we haven't specifically raised that you think are really critical.
So I've got a couple of,
Yeah,
of really sort of range ones. I think we look past some really simple things that we take for granted that we're good at every day. Like, what motivates you to buy something at a supermarket? When you're comparing two different products, right? Or when you see things that are on sale, how does that psychology of buying translate to what we do and how we position things to clients? Or if we're putting together a pitch or giving them options, what can we take from that? When we are walking down the street, we see a really cool poster or piece of street art, we're walking past a bunch of galleries or picking out which postcards to send to friends. What visually inspires and motivates us? And how does that translate into how we develop our style? Or as Alison said, going back to basics, thinking about those things and bringing them in and having those enrich and change and elevate our work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, you know, it is interesting specifically from a product development perspective. So one of the roles that I've had in the past is building and designing sort of scaled digital solutions to deliver legal advice in an alternative way. And in the design, as Erica will well know, we did used to work together, you really need to consider, you know, the customer and what they need and how they will use that tool, which is something that can be difficult, I think, for lawyers, is to put themselves in the minds of their clients who are buying their services. And I think, again, it comes back to the original point that you need to know your clients as well.
Not only know your client, we promote at Microsoft internally and externally with customers, something we call the challenger mindset, right? A challenger is somebody who's a driver of change instead of a receiver or a good receiver of change. It creates, you know, positive tension. It creates dreams of possibilities, and so I think that's a good skill that is applicable both within the team or across the organization, but very importantly also with the customers, with the client themselves. Painting a better picture, okay, and challenging the status quo. It's a good skill to have.
Yeah, I might call on Rob Mars now to talk a little bit about sort of your visibility of the curriculums as well as you know, activities that we can undertake to better support these skills. So would be really interested in hearing sort of what's happening in that space. What are the new skills that are being taught?
Thank you, April. Thank you everyone for an interesting discussion so far. For me, whenever I speak to lawyers across, mostly admittedly across the UK and particularly in Scotland, the thing that comes back consistently, I suppose, is that point that a few people have made about curiosity. or or a learning mindset if you want. And I think that's really key, because it's quite easy to focus on a particular skill that is really important right now. To pick on one, a better understanding of data, I think that will probably be even more useful in the future. So it's not the most apposite example, but there's no point building something into the curriculum that is really important now, which will not be important in 5 years' time. So what you want to do is build a mindset in the new generation of lawyers that they will have to consistently adapt over the course of their career. And they may see, we can't prepare them for things that we can't see coming in 10 or 15 years' time. So that's fairly big for all jurisdictions and all firms and all regulators. On top of that, you have, well, in Scotland, we've got 12,000 solicitors who are already qualified. In England and Wales, we've got 150,000 solicitors already qualified. And everybody focuses on, well, what are you teaching the next generation? And me as a regulator thinks, what about the 12,000 members we've already got? How do we keep them up to speed? So again, promoting that consistently. I mean, I think what will actually happen is we will see more law firms employing project managers who are trained project managers rather than having done an afternoon course in project management, although that's always better than not doing the course, and who will collaborate with lawyers in the design and delivery of legal services. We'll probably see more, to pick up on Erica's point, UX designers coming into law firms as well, which is beginning to happen, and they will work with lawyers. I don't think we necessarily, lawyers therefore will need to understand what UX is, they'll have to understand what a project is, but somebody else will be doing that work and pushing it forward in the medium to large size firms. I do think a better understanding of data, how it travels around, what's good data, what's bad data, is probably important. But then you come back to the foundational skills. What's the foundational skill for data? It's an understanding of statistics. And if you say the word statistics to many lawyers, they hear numbers and they say, I didn't go to law school to become an accountant. So, for me, it comes back to a willingness to learn, a willingness to adapt over a career. Somebody who qualifies in 2020 will be practicing in 2060. Look how far we've come since 1980. If you want to see even if we just progress at the same rate, no emails, no real computers, no internet, no e-discovery, all of these things that didn't exist, and the profession has adapted, and it will have to continue to adapt.
Yeah, I think this might be a good time, maybe Erica, for you to talk a little bit about the courses that you're teaching, and sort of, they are quite different, some of the skills that I think that you're teaching, and I think are really interesting to this discussion in particular.
Thanks so much, April. As a matter of fact, one of my former students who is now heading to Bird and Bird, but was at one time an intern at Al-Tamimi, she's Jordanian. She wrote me last week and she said, I was looking at a video, a commercial that I shot for your legal innovation class a few years ago. And I was watching it with my friends in our WhatsApp group, like all of the students who were on that team. And she said, I can't believe how ahead of our time we were. And now that I'm entering the profession full time, I see just how important those skills were. And that's like the best moment. That's the best aha moment, when you're realizing that you're empowering people to capitalize on skills that they had, that they didn't think were relevant to the profession, and enabling them to really be leaders. So, I think oftentimes there's a criticism, and before by the way, just by background, before I moved to Simmons Wavelength, I was a full-time academic based out of the University of Miami for about 7 years. So I moved over to the big bad side of the private sector. But I think, if we look at big criticisms of legal education, we hear things like, oh, students aren't prepared for the real world of practice, and that there's this chasm between the theoretical and practical side of things. One of the nice byproducts of this whole COVID fiasco is that it's prompted real changes in legal education that reflect what's actually going on in the profession. So for example, classes moving online, students and professors having to collaborate and communicate and work together that way. This reflects exactly what we're seeing firms and clients having to do. So in that sense, it's actually better preparing our future lawyers for what they're going to have to encounter. One really interesting byproduct of this is that we know that law firms are very hierarchical. But this nice sort of digital revolution that we're seeing with so much more technology being used by firms and clients is that younger lawyers are oftentimes getting to lead where they traditionally wouldn't, because they get to be tech champions. They get to show how they can create culture. They can lead the way, teach an old dog some new tricks, maybe, if I can say that. There's lots of great work that is being done in the legal education world. People like Anna Donovan at University College London, who I know is one of our attendees today, she's doing amazing stuff in pioneering approaches to traditional subjects like competition law, but also promoting innovation in practical ways that really empower students and equip them for success. There are also programs out there like Law Without Walls, which I ran for several years. There's the new Basirius program that Rob was mentioning. There's Passport to Practice. There are people like Marcia Narayan Weldon out of the University of Miami who are doing some really incredible stuff with transactional law and drafting and teaching different workshops and using online tools to get students to actually do the work, not just listen to a lecture, blab about it, and analyze the document, which is cool to see. So it's really encouraging that we see that there are these professors who are leveraging technology to transform how this theory is transferred, while also actually developing the tangible skills that we were talking about, like client listening, analytical thinking, client service, communication, and collaboration. One last quick point. So in my class at IE University this past fall, it's a legal innovation and legal design course. For the final project, I had my students take a heavily redacted copy of my residential lease here in the UK, and I had them completely redo it. Each team had different parts of the lease that they had to redo. We know that even as lawyers, leases can be really unfriendly. They can be hard to read, hard to navigate. And imagine if you're a 17, 18, 19-year-old student, chances are your parents are probably paying for your lease, but you probably don't read that document until it's time to get in trouble or you need something, right? So that was a really cool experience. In the course, I also have things like bringing in artists to teach us how to be more visual. And how to develop our visual eye. I've brought in poets to teach us how to develop empathy on the spot. And in the way that we work with others. I bring in every year an expert in crisis management who's now a lawyer at Latham & Watkins, and we do a crisis simulation to learn about the different roles and capacities that lawyers play in managing a crisis. And I think that thinking about how we use technology and thinking about how we can be more multidisciplinary will really help prepare our lawyers better for tomorrow. So I think sometimes you just have to try it. And see what sticks. And I'm fortunate enough to teach at a university that fully supports this kind of thing. But what I'm seeing is now the real value. I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of my former students, to have hired them and brought them onto my team. And they're amazing. They're equipped. They get it. And that's really exciting. So I'll stop there.
That's really
Erica,
great.
can I just want to just add to your list of amazing people.
You teach as well, so.
No, just to say, it just brought back a memory that when I was at Linklaters, who I was with for a very long time before I joined Altamimi, we went to the Comedy Store in London and people were like, why are you going there? What are you doing that for? And we did some courses there, some improv, which were absolutely brilliant, which we then used in some of the skills training at Linklaters, both internally and for clients. It was great. Whole new kind of mind shift doing that stuff.
And it's fun too. It's a bonding activity.
Yeah.
There's a ton of research that shows that any kind of bonding activity you can do will make a team stronger, especially when it's fun and you kind of remove that, well, I'm a lawyer, I've been practicing X years. How many years have you been practicing?
Yeah.
None of us are practicing improv artists. Well, maybe some are, right, in our spare time. But it's nice to have that equal playing field, something where everyone can succeed, learn something new. And those are really valuable experiences.
Totally.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think, does anyone else have anything that they just want to jump in to add that maybe we haven't covered? Otherwise, we have some themed questions that we might be able to talk about. Rob, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were I think this is being recorded. As I said in the chat, I agreed with everything Erica just said, so I'll be revisiting it, certainly. The message I always try and get across in these talks is that, you know, I think the debate about coding for lawyers has been done to death, and I don't think anybody here is suggesting it. I think the main thing for me, and how I try to sum it up is to new lawyers, is the really important thing is decoding, not coding. It's understanding the matter, it's understanding the technology that you need to use on the matter, it's really understanding your clients and how best to serve them in new and innovative ways, as Erica has just said. So that's how I try to sum it up, decoding rather than coding. Hopefully that kills that argument a little bit, but just with everything Erica said, a very quick thing.
I think that that's a really important point that you make, actually, and it goes back to the point on you know, I know in the audience we have a number of students as well, and there are alternative legal careers. So having a law degree does not mean that you must just be a lawyer. You can take your learning of the law and also, you know, do other things. But in particular, once you've been practicing for law for a long time, taking a weekend coding course does not make you a coder the same way a coder doing a weekend legal course does not make them a lawyer. But it does not mean that you can't learn to work with those people. And that is a skill in and of itself, because sometimes we speak different languages. And so I think everyone has made this point about collaboration and communication. It's the need to learn how to best work together with people who are subject matter experts in the way that they work. And Ramez, I mean, you work with lots of lawyers. How do you find their skills in communication?
I work mainly with in-house lawyers. We have a lot of them in Microsoft, as you can imagine, and some outside counsel. I just want to talk about the coding a bit. I hate to break it to everybody, but one of the hottest technologies today is what we call no-code, low-code applications, right? Which allows you to create some very sophisticated applications without writing a single line of code, right? You just have to know your processes, or you know, you have the right vision, and it's voila, it's almost like magic. Communication is very important. I'm fortunate to be working with a number of lawyers that are tech intrigued, if I want to say, and so open mindset is very important. You don't have to be the expert. You can collaborate with experts as long as you know what the customer or the one you're serving needs, and what are you solving for, right? Communication, understanding the win-win or driving for win-win. Solving problems together is key. Without those, it will be a very, very unproductive engagement between, let's say, business or technologists and lawyers, or you know, clients and lawyers. But yeah, technology is nothing to fear. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things we successfully launched at Microsoft is a chatbot, an internal chatbot that deals with all the mundane questions we ask our in-house lawyers all the time. So we don't have to book a time with a lawyer and ask a question. We can just ask this digital assistant that's available 24/7, any question, and 70% of the time, that's all you need to do. The trick here is that to get to that level of self-service, if you want, it's a simple matter of, you know, taking your FAQ, Word document, for example, and ingesting it into a machine learning model, right? So just based on frequently asked questions, you can create a self-help, self-service chatbot that will impress customers as well as colleagues. We overblow the amount of skills we need and the technological capabilities we need to use technology. Even the tools you know, my colleagues were talking about, Teams and Word and Excel. These are, we invest a lot of money and effort to make them more user-friendly. Okay, and they're constantly improving in that department. They're very intuitive. They're designed to be intuitive, and there are tons of educational material, in many forms. You know, you don't have to go to a class to understand how to use Teams. I prefer to play around with it and figure it out on my own. Other people watch videos. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. Not that difficult. I mean,
I confess I had to use a lot of YouTube videos at the beginning of Teams.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I open it up to the panelists if there's any other points that they'd like to add. We do have sort of two themed types of questions in the chat, which I think we can revisit. But is there anything that any of the panelists would just like to add as we sort of wrap up the official part of the conversation? Rob?
Yeah, I just want to circle it back to clients. I mean, we've heard need to get close to clients, need to understand clients. And I think that the average law firm partner, if you were to strap them into a chair and put them on a lie detector and say, do you understand your client's needs? That person would say yes, and the needle wouldn't move. But if you spoke to the client, they would say not so much. And how do you bridge that gap? And how do you bridge that gap back to what I was saying about my sort of philosophy or strategy earlier? How do you do that in a world that's constantly changing? Because it's reasonable to assume that you're going to be having discussions with your clients in 2021 about what their needs are going to be in 2022 that's going to raise topics that we're not even thinking about today. I mean, just 4 months ago, we weren't talking about COVID. Just leave that one there. So how do we learn the skills? Because that's what we're talking about. It's not knowledge, it's skills. It's like golf. You don't learn golf by watching a video about golf or reading a book on golf and, hey, I'm Ernie Els. It's something that you practice and you work out your own style. How do you get people to interact with clients in a way that really does surface these emerging needs and these emerging tensions? Because if one looks at the way the client procurement behavior is changing and the way that they're selecting their law firms, I think that's quite disturbing. I mean, the rise of legal companies and alternative legal service providers and the big four and the size of in-house teams all sort of imply our external legal service providers, our external law firms are missing a trick. And I think that's a very urgent problem that needs to be solved within the next year. I might have said 2 or 3 years had it not been for the last few months, but I really do think that we're seeing a sea change emerge now. And the kinds of conversations that law firm partners need to be having with their clients need to move away from the transactional. They can in no way be salesy. There's a business development conversation that's a different thing, and those still need to happen. I'm not talking about that though. I'm talking about that intersection between the law and the business that in-house lawyers are already all over, and how these emerging digitalization trends are upending legal needs, and what kind of services a law firm is going to need to be able to sell its clients next year and the year after in order to still be in business. And I don't think we're anywhere near that.
Can I add to that point? LexisNexis, we came out with a report called Amplifying the Voice of the Client a couple of years ago, and it talks about the disconnect, exactly what Rob's saying, between how in-house lawyers perceive things and how private practice perceive things. And it sounds a bit trivial, but one of the common things is in-house lawyers want good advice quickly, not perfect advice late. They want an answer to a question. And LexisNexis, we have a lot of authors writing for us. And one of the things that always surprises me, when people contribute to Lexis PSL or they write articles, they always write really long and detailed and covering every possibility, every eventuality. And it's very well written. Lawyers are excellent writers. They know the law, but no one wants to read all that. People want short, concise tables, getting to an answer. And it's very hard to try to get lawyers to do that. It's almost, well, I have to demonstrate that I know all my stuff. I have to give them every possibility. No one has time to read all that. So that's a disconnect that always is very difficult to bridge. Because sometimes lawyers say, I don't understand your business well enough to give you a yes or no answer. You're asking for Rolls-Royce advice at Honda Accord prices. That's a direct quote. I won't mention the firm. But you have to really put yourself in the feet of the in-house lawyer who has to do that to his business. He has to come up with a yes or no answer. He has to be concise. So I can't emphasize enough, be concise, but that's very difficult.
Yeah, Alison, did you have?
Yeah, I just want to just to echo both Rob and Hussein, actually. One thing that I think we have become worse at is actually just picking up a phone and speaking to a client. I think there's a tendency for people just to hide behind emails. Emails, as we know, I mean, we're still using emails. Why? Why are we still using emails? They're a very blunt instrument as well. And I don't know if anybody's aware either, I'm sure many of you are, but there's a great resource called Crafty Counsel. Ben White, who's behind Crafty Counsel, produces a ton of fantastic videos, short videos for in-house counsel. And he did one recently, about a month or so ago, I think, and he interviewed an in-house counsel from a guy from, I think he was in Turkey or Cyprus. Anyway, the lawyer said, listen, you know, I've had about 40 force majeure client alerts sent to me. I haven't got the bandwidth to read all of these. I'm being spammed. Please just pick the phone up to me and ask me how I am. And it's something which I always try and talk to more junior lawyers about, saying just phone. If you're confused or unsure about something, just pick up the phone. You're speaking to another human being. Just move beyond the big client badge that you just see firmly attached to their lapel, and just remember that it's a human being at the end of the day. So yeah, I think kind of circling back to basic stuff, let's get the communication right as well and speak to people, not just endless to and from on the email.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think, you know, I think I've heard sort of some themes today, and they all seem quite consistent about the need for change behaviors. So yes, there are skill sets that need change, but a lot of it is also about the behaviors. And I think definitely speaking to people, particularly in this environment, where we are behind a screen all of the time, is really important, because email can become even, I don't know how many of you, your inboxes, what happened to them post-COVID, but a lot of us, I think it's increased the volume of communication because we aren't communicating. So I do think that is really important. I'm going to turn to two of the questions that we've received. One is, I think, slightly easier to answer, maybe, but it is the question is, you know, are there any tech products out there that help solve this gap? There is no one-stop solution, unless somebody wants to correct me. There isn't a particular technology platform that is going to help you learn all of the skills. We have talked a little bit about some of them. So we've talked about things like Crafty Counsel and no-code, low-code platforms. I can give you an example of one of the ways that I've been using technology to try to sort of minimize the skills gap. And that is to using basic low-code chatbot technology to help lawyers start to understand how things fit together. So asking them to identify a problem, design a solution, and build it themselves. Now, this is very basic building blocks, but it helps them to understand the pieces that fit together. And that's been really well received. And so I put it out to the panel about how they've used technology to help educate people in some of these skills that we've talked about. The answer may be none.
So for me, one of the really cool things, and April will have seen me do this before, and I know that she's done this too, is to get people to draw things out. And there's a lot of research that goes into the power of harnessing our inner child and pulling out our crayons and actually being quite visual with things. When someone has an idea, one of the biggest challenges that anyone has, no matter which field you're in, is taking that idea and conveying that idea to someone else. And this builds on what April was saying. When you have something like, so I have a Surface Hub now that sits in my house. It used to live in our office. But when you use a tool like Microsoft Whiteboard, and you can even do it remotely, and draw things out, sketch things out, literally put ideas on paper, basic prototypes to fit those pieces together and collaborate towards what something could look like, the possibilities are endless. So something as simple as, I'm not talking about document automation or AI and machine learning, something as simple as being able to collaboratively draw and illustrate something and map out, say, even a process, a timeline, is really useful.
I might add on that point. I'll give you some examples from the Middle East of very quick design wins. Latham & Watkins did a free zone comparator tool. We have 60 free zones in the UAE, and often one of the key things is to compare which free zone you go for depending on your activity. And they've done a very nice table where you can choose 2 free zones. You can compare capital requirements, time it takes, and it's just a very simple design. Similarly, there's an IP firm called Rouse & Co, which have an IP toolkit. You can answer a series of questions, and then you'll get a health check on your IP rights. Al-Tamimi is very good at doing these industry analysis with these little, I don't know, Alison, how you do. You got these little icons, like you had your health sector report with a little ambulance going and stuff like that. But anything that makes something more visual in a tabular form, it sounds simple, but it's true. As a client, you just want to understand quickly where things stand. So I think there's very quick wins on the design side.
I think it's also a matter of sticking to topics that really, really are important to the client. I was speaking to a general counsel yesterday who was commenting on the number of emails that he had from firms telling him what those firms are doing for their people. And he said that's all very nice, but not quite, he couldn't care less. But why are you talking about doing things for your people as though it's an unusual thing to do? And another one, so when this COVID outbreak, we were about three weeks into the lockdown, and I was speaking to an entirely different person, and that person also said he's got masses of emails, he's got masses of things about force majeure and all sorts of other things, but he hasn't had one client or one firm pick up the phone to him and ask how he is. And I found that extraordinary. It's almost as though we're tone deaf.
I think those of us who are lawyers tend to hear the tone deaf comment a lot. But I think what's really, encouraging, for me and hopefully for the people who are participating, is sort of the breadth and of experience of this panel, but also the openness of everyone to talk about, the changes that are needed, the changes that they are affecting. And I would really like to thank everyone on the panel for all of your contributions. I think it's been a really interesting session, and for me and hopefully for our participants as well. And so thanks everyone very much for participating. We don't have any more questions left in the Q&A and chat. So I would like to thank you very much for your participation. And for those who are participants, you know how to reach out to any of us. If you have any individual questions, I know that all of the panelists would be quite happy to share more information with you. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, April, for being a fantastic moderator.
Welcome.
Thank you all.
Here.
Thank you all.
Yes, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Right, thank you very much to our amazing moderator April and our fantastic panelists. I think that was a wonderful discussion on legal skills, and we've got some things coming up like our legal certification later on in the year, and I think skills like this are really important to learn about. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.